under my administration, the United States does not torture. We will abide by the Geneva Conventions, that we will uphold our highest values and ideals.
And at the sound of that, the Bill of Rights momentarily stopped turning over and over and over in its shallow, recent grave. Besides at least saying he rejects torture, the president-elect has also said that he will close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, which currently holds about 250 people, most of whom have not been charged with anything. Constitutionally speaking, Guantanamo is a big problem. But what about another constitutional problem, or at least a moral and strategic problem, that's about 60 times the size of the problem we've got at Guantanamo? It does not get very much attention, but U.S. forces are holding about 15,000 people in jail in Iraq. And like Guantanamo, most of those people have not been charged with anything. Until last Wednesday, we held those prisoners in Iraq under terms of the UN Security Council resolution that governed the presence of our troops in that country. But as of January 1st, that UN resolution thing is over. And the new terms on which we are in Iraq are spelled out in this status of forces agreement. It's just between us and the Iraqis. That agreement says we are supposed to hand over all the prisoners to Iraqi authorities, who will deal with them according to Iraqi law. Here's the important part. Iraqi law doesn't have any provision for holding people without charges. What happens now? Well, this is the big deal for us. The U.S. military has asked the Iraqis to keep holding at least some of these prisoners without charging them. Never mind the law. A spokesman emailed the Reuters news service today saying, quote, "We seriously desire that Iraq will choose to keep these detainees off the streets without charges." Did I say that part? And the part about how that's illegal under Iraqi law, but we're asking them to do it anyway? Asking them to adopt our brilliant prison without trial example? Joining us now to try to talk me down here is Jonathan Turley, professor of law at George Washington University. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, Rachel.
Here's your chance to talk me down. Are we telling the Iraqis to do imprisonment without trial here at our request?
Well, we most certainly are. The interesting thing is that George Bush set out in saying that he wanted to create a nation like ours, and unfortunately, he may be succeeding. I mean, we have achieved the lowest common denominator in terms of a legal system, and we're trying to get Iraq to do the same thing. Remember, this is exactly what George Bush did. He claimed that he had the right on the enemy combatant program or policy to take an American citizen like Jose Padilla, strip him of his constitutional rights, hold him indefinitely, bar him access to counsel and to courts. And so he's encouraging Iraq to do that themselves. And I think what would be interesting is that Iraq could really emerge as a sovereign nation and not some type of mini-me to George Bush if it simply said no and said, you know what? We're going to go our own way here, not your way. We're going to apply the rule of law. Under that agreement, by the way, it clearly states that the prisoners to be transferred would be transferred either under a warrant or a criminal charge, or they would be released. There's no third option. But of course, President Bush has been creating that type of new option in our country as well.
Well, we've been paying a lot of attention, politically speaking, to Guantanamo, but even in addition to Iraq, there are a whole lot of offshore prisons that the Obama administration is about to inherit. I wonder, thinking about these moral and legal and constitutional dilemmas, if it's reasonable to expect some sort of categorical rejection of imprisonment without trial, of the same type that we heard from Obama today, his categorical rejection of torture.
Well, of course, neither Obama nor Bush need to give a categorical rejection. We already have a Constitution that is itself a categorical rejection. And so we don't have to wait to see if Obama is going to recognize what's already in that document. But all of us expect that he will indeed stop these practices. He will close Guantanamo Bay. But the real question, Rachel, is not whether there will be torture in my administration. No one thinks that Obama is going to engage in torture and continue to torture people. The question is whether he will enforce the law and pursue those who did torture people. You know, if the former president was accused of bank robbery, we wouldn't expect the new president, to say, I'm not going to rob banks anymore. We would expect him to say he's going to go and arrest the bank robber. Now, we have to be frank. There's a credible basis here to argue that President Bush and Vice President Cheney have committed war crimes, and that would make them war criminals. And all of this talk about we have to look to the future and we have to not look to the past, well, in our immediate past may be war crimes, and we sure better look at that.
Well, thinking about the prospect of prosecution, it seems likely that the #2 guy at the CIA, Steve Kappas, will be staying on under Leon Panetta if he is confirmed. Steve Kappas, in his role at the CIA, was at least indirectly in charge of the CIA's secret detention policies. If that's going to be part of what is pursued here, doesn't keeping him in that job sort of preclude the realistic prospect that that will be pursued, exposed, and prosecuted if necessary?
That's a very curious thing to do. That's absolutely right. And all this talk about having a truth commission, everything that is coming out of the Congress and the Obama administration is very worrisome. It is not the type of stuff that would be said if you were seriously going to pursue prosecution. But they are insane to try to dodge this issue. Because if we don't investigate this administration for war crimes and illegality, particularly war crimes, someone else might. The fact is the rest of the world sees these as war crimes. How are these people going to travel? What happens when all these Bush officials go off to Paris with their spouses? A lot of the world views them not as tourists, but as war criminals. It'd be much better for us to handle this issue than suffer the indignity of having other nations hold accountable our own leaders.
And us having to suffer the indignity of having knowingly let this stuff go. Jonathan Turley,
Correct.
Professor of Law at George Washington University, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's always
Thanks,
such a pleasure
Rachel.
to have you on the show. Today's report by a congressional oversight panel says that the Treasury Department has no idea what's going on with TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or as I like to think of it, the Trouble Knowing Where the Assets Have Gone program. I've asked it before and I will ask it again. What are the chances with this financial bailout here that we are being punked? Lame duck watch ahead.